Thanks for hanging out with us on this Thursday. We are Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network, along with D-Gun, B. Brooks. I am Rob Ellis. We're hanging out with you. And joining us right now, always love chatting with Mike about everything in the world of sports. Does a phenomenal job, and you can check out his work at Inquirer.com and, of course, on Twitter as well at Mike Sielski, and on WIP on the weekends with Glenn Mack now. Mike Sielski. Mike, when are you on this weekend with Glenn? Saturday?
Saturday from 10 to 1, as usual.
Okay, excellent.
I used to enjoy talking to Mike, but after his shot at, you know what I'm talking about.
Oh no, there's bad blood. I forgot about
the other day, which was hilarious.
All I said was, look, all right, so first of all, couple things. First of all, shout out to Kevin Flatley,
yes,
who just retired from NBC Sports Philadelphia.
Yes.
Great guy.
Yep.
And a bunch of people
20 years.
Yep, and a bunch of people got together the other night. I was not invited somehow. I don't know what happened. Invitation must have went to my spam folder or something.
Lost in translation, bro.
But a bunch of people went out to celebrate Kevin the other night, and Gunnar was there. And I think Dave Zangaro at NBC Sports Philadelphia made the comment that they let Gunnar was able to go out on a school night. And all I said was, at Gunnar's age, every night is a school night.
Oh, see what I mean? See? We were friends.
It was pretty funny. Gotta be honest.
We were good friends until that.
That's why I brought Mike on today. I'm a mender. I mend fences here.
So one other quick shout out, if you guys haven't done it already, and I'm sure you have. Yep. Shout out to Jim Salisbury, who is leaving NBC Sports Philadelphia, the dean of Phillies beat reporters. Just an all-around great guy, great professional. He's going to be missed in that press box. A lot of us who came up in the Philly media as writers learned how to do the job by watching Jim, and I consider myself one of those. So shout out to him.
I really hope that in some capacity, if he wants to, he continues to write, because he is must read. That's for sure. But yeah, well said, Mike, for sure. Yeah, we talked about him a little bit earlier, but couldn't agree more. Could not agree more, man. All right, I'm going to start with this, and this is where we began the show, and really positive news here. Damar Hamlin, and by all accounts, and this is even coming from his physicians, he's able to squeeze hands, able to open his eyes, seems to have neurological function, which was a huge concern. He's still far from being out of the woods here, but appears he's making great progress, man, and that is just unbelievable news on this Thursday.
It's great. It's great. There's nothing more you can say except you hope it continues on this trajectory of moving upward and getting better. I think in a strange way, in a sad way, the way our society's fractured nowadays, sometimes it takes a near tragedy like this to kind of galvanize people and get us all pointed in the right direction. You don't ever want to see something like this happen, but if there is a silver lining to it, maybe that's it. And maybe the fact that so many people have been thinking of Damar and praying for him, maybe it's having some effect. I'd like to think so.
Amen. Amen. Well said. And look, I know, Mike, I'll be honest with you, I wasn't familiar with the Chuck Hughes story. I didn't know, about this in 1971. And I know there is some similarities, but I know they thought he had some pre-existing stuff as well. But God, when you think about it, it's pretty barbaric that they finished the game with this guy just kind of drug off to the sidelines, and sadly he passed away later at the hospital in Detroit after the game. But man, scary stuff.
Yeah, very scary stuff. This was in 1971. This was more than 51 years ago. Hughes actually played 3 years with the Eagles. He was a wide receiver. They had drafted him out of UTEP. He was a really good receiver at UTEP, had 86 catches and 13 touchdowns in 1 year. But at the time, the Eagles had two really good receivers in Ben Hawkins and Harold Jackson. So they didn't keep Hughes around. They ended up trading him to the Lions. And on this day in 1971, the Lions are playing the Bears. It's about a minute left in the game. The Lions are down, and they're driving to try to get the go-ahead touchdown. And Hughes is walking back to the huddle and just collapses and basically drops dead from a blood clot. And it's the only time in NFL history that a player has died on the field. And, you think about it, Rob, I wonder how differently we might be viewing the Hamlin story and situation if it had been less similar to the Hughes story, if it had been a hit to the head,
Right.
if it had been a broken neck, if it had been something that had been more directly attributable to football, right? Like this was almost a lightning bolt. And I just wonder, we're asking a lot of hard questions about football and the danger, the physical danger that the guys who play it put themselves through. And those are all good questions to ask. But man, this was so out of the blue and so rare that I just wonder how different the conversation would be if it had been, a late hit or a helmet to helmet hit or something beyond just something that surprised everybody.
Yeah, you just chalk it up to that's football in some ways, right? And
Yeah.
maybe this will cause the impetus for some changes. Now, what's encouraging is the first responders were unbelievable in the way that they did their job. Fortunately, that hospital is extremely close to where the stadium is for the Bengals. There were a lot of things that were fortunate, but it does show you that at least there's some systems in place that are working, you would think. If that's encouraging from maybe what it was 5-10 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's the case not only at the professional level of football. I think it's true at the college level, at the high school level. I actually did a big story a couple of years ago, back in 2018, I think, about a high school football referee in Delaware who dropped dead of a heart attack during a state playoff game in Delaware. And they continued the game. And there was an ambulance next to the field, and he was taken away to the closest hospital, which was about a 10-minute ride away. But it also shows you how our perspective on these kinds of things have changed, even in 4 or 5 years' time. That, this incident happened, I guess it'd be a little longer than that. This incident happened in 2016. But you're looking at 6 years later, and now the idea of continuing that game on Monday night, even at the NFL level, was just so far outside, anybody's thinking that it would have been, I think most people would have considered it kind of obscene to keep the game going.
Yeah.
It's definitely different from what back in the day, because I can remember being in practice and a guy getting hurt. They would just move the drill down or, something that sort. I mean, just to think that this is just one more thing, one more incident that, the NFL has to navigate through. This is one of those things where what are they going to do now that you can't play the game, or I'm thinking you can't play the game. What do you think? What is their approach to this? How are they going to navigate through this in order to make it fair for both the Bills, Cincinnati, and the Chiefs?
Well, I think with some of the backlash, Barrett, that the league has gotten fairly or unfairly for its handling of this, I think they're going to defer as much as they can to both teams. And it sounds like from everything that's coming out of Cincinnati, the Bengals are going to defer to the Bills as much as they possibly can. To Hamlin's, Damar's teammates and coaches and all of that. So I don't know if they're going to play that game, and I don't know yet what kind of scheduling is going to be, changes are going to be made to accommodate the Bills-Bengals game, if any. I don't know if they're going to play this game or not. They may just chalk it up as a no contest. It counts as a tie in the standings, and if the Bills and the Bengals meet in the playoffs, maybe they play it on a neutral site. I think Adam Schefter suggested as much.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike,
like it may shake out that way. God, you're there.
Yeah, Mike, earlier in the show, I had said that you look at the last 5-6 years and look at the volume of young players that decided to call it a career because of the CTE scare. As we gain more and more knowledge. And I believe moving forward, you're going to see more and more young men shorten their NFL careers because of this. I mean, this is something that whether you were on that field or watched it on TV like millions of us did, if you're blessed enough to play the game at that level, and we hear more and more players nowadays talking about the quality of life after the game is said and done. I can see more players bowing out of the game at an earlier age because of this type of scare.
I think you're 100% right, Gunnar. I think we're going to see fewer and fewer kids play football, not necessarily because they don't want to play, but because their parents are going to say, you are not going to play football. Right. Where I live in the suburbs of Philadelphia, you're seeing that more and more. And I think we have to think through the ramifications of this in some ways and what this might lead to in terms of who's going to be left to play football if this trend continues. If you think about it, it's going to be kids or men, young men, who feel like they have to, that feel like it's their way out from, maybe a tough upbringing, maybe harsh economic circumstances. There's a class issue here. And in some respects, by proxy, maybe a race issue here that's going to come up in terms of where does the NFL's workforce come from? Is it going to be, if consider your scenario, Gunnar, like if more and more players step away, who's going to step away? It's going to be guys who feel like they can, either financially or because they have other options, because they have skills in other areas. If you feel like you don't, you're going to keep playing probably. And what are the risks you're putting yourself through?
Which means also the product will be even more watered down in the future if more and more players start stepping away from the game. If young men decide not to play the game at all, if those who are fortunate enough to get to that level play but shorten their careers, you're talking about an even more watered down product, because over the last 10, 15 years, that's what we've talked about, that you have 32 teams, but you don't have 32 legitimate starting quarterbacks in the National Football League. You don't have legitimate backups in the National Football League. They even talk about the offensive and defensive linemen that play the game now are not as well-versed, well-schooled, as athletic as they were just 10 years ago. And I understand why now. There's a fear factor here in terms of a quality of health that has to be figured into the overall equation.
It's interesting, Gunnar, and I would love to get Barrett's perspective on this as a former player. A few weeks ago, if you guys remember, there was that play in the game, at the end of the game, between the Buccaneers and the Falcons, where Grady Jarrett threw Tom Brady down for a sack. And everybody said, well, and he was whistled for roughing the passer or unnecessary roughness. And I ended up talking to a few guys in the Eagles locker room, particularly Hassan Reddick and Brandon Graham, about this. What do you guys think of this sort of play, right? And one of the things that Hassan said to me was, look, this is football. We are men. We understand what the risks are. The NFL can try to, throw flags on us and try to mitigate the nature of the sport. But at the end, we are men. We know what we're signing up for when we decide to play professional football, or even college football, or to a degree high school football. Although, you're young men. You're technically not adults when you're playing high school football. And we are willing to take these risks. But you're right, Gunnar. I wonder how many men, how many athletes are willing to do that. And Barrett, to your background, how do guys think now compared to the way maybe you guys thought back then when you played?
It's way different now, because they used to tell us, "Here, take some ice and ibuprofen and go play." And there was a real sense of, okay, don't say anything, because you got a short amount of time to maximize your money making potential. You don't make the club in the tub. You say you're injured, and you are maybe injured, but the likelihood of you being on this team is going to be slim to none if you keep on saying you're injured. And those are things that we thought about. I mean, I know I had 6 diagnosed concussions, but I've had way more concussions than that. My last play that I played in NFL with, I was drive blocking a linebacker for the Panthers, and Deuce, comes and hits me from behind. Deuce Staley hits me from behind. My knee gets jabbed into the ground. I ripped my quad muscle from my patella tendon. My entire quad muscle was up in the top of my thigh. Now, the doc came out and said, "Oh man, Brooksy, you're all right." I said, "What do you mean you're all right?" He pulled my pants leg up, and you could see how my skin had folded over where my bone is, because there was no muscle there. It was up on my thigh, up the top of my thigh. He said, "Well, somebody half your age and half your size couldn't come back from this." So my career is over with. But yet and still, they only give us 5 years. After I retired, they only give you 5 years of health care. But yet the damn Goodell, making $44 million a year, gets lifetime insurance, plus his family gets lifetime insurance. But we can't even get lifetime insurance. We get 5 years after we leave the NFL. It's all bull, man. So they say that they care about us as players, but they don't. If that's the case, we'd have lifetime health care. This kid won't have lifetime health care. He will have health care for the next 5 years. Then after that, he won't have health care. And that's a sad truth that comes with the NFL. We have the only contracts that aren't guaranteed. So, but in saying that, would I do it again? Absolutely, because it put my family in, in a position where I'm financially stable enough to do what I want to do.
Well said. Well said, Mike. Let me spin into the trivial, certainly when it comes to something like this. But I do want to ask you about the Eagles before we let you get out of here. Do you view this as, look, ebb and flow? If this was week 4 and 5 and they threw a couple duds out there with a backup quarterback, it's probably not panic time, or is there something a little bit more going on here with the Eagles right now?
I lean toward option B there, Rob. I mean, they played their worst game of the season against the Saints, and it wasn't close. Even the loss to Washington, where they committed 3 or 4 turnovers. If Quez Watkins holds on to the ball on that deep pass from Jalen Hurts, they're probably going to win that game. As poorly as they played that day, but they were awful against the Saints. So yeah, it is a concern. Timing matters, especially in a season as short as the NFL's, when you only have 16, 17 games. So it's a concern. I think you're going to see Jalen Hurts start on Sunday. I don't think the Eagles, getting back to the conversation we just had with Barrett about the pressures about starting and playing when you're injured. In the world of the NFL, there isn't much choice here. And I'm willing to bet Jalen Hurts wants to be out there because that's the way athletes think. And it would surprise me if he weren't out there. And if your foremost priority is the Eagles getting home field advantage and the number 1 seed in the NFC, then he better be out there and they better win on Sunday.
Interesting. Yeah. Well said. Well said. That's for sure. So the play calling's been a little curious. Certainly, from a Sunday standpoint. I said earlier, it sort of felt like some of the stretches we'd go through with Andy where he would fall in love with the pass. But I don't know, for me, where I guess I'm optimistic, but I'm also puzzled a little bit is Nick Sirianni and Shane Steichen have been willing to adapt to whatever their circumstances. Last year, hey, we got to run it. If we're going to win, we're going to run the ball. And they did it. Earlier in the year, we got to put the Cardinals away in Arizona, even though it was kind of an ugly game, run it down their throat. Do you think it's enough of a wake-up call that this went as sideways as it did, that they will get back to more balance here?
I think if Hurts is in the lineup, and I think we all expect he will be, they will. They'll feel more comfortable because of the versatility he gives them with his ability to be able to run the ball. Now, how much they want to put him at risk with that shoulder of getting tackled, that's a different question. I've probably said to you guys during the course of the season, I know I said it this morning on WIP with Angelo Cataldi, the Eagles have played this entire season. They have called plays and run their offense as if they do not care about whether Jalen Hurts gets a long-term contract or not. They don't seem to care whether he's their franchise quarterback based on the way they have run their offense, because he is the nexus of it. People asked, is it Hurts or is it the system? It's an irrelevant question. Clearly, he is the system. He makes this go. And so if he's out there, they're going to run him. I think the fact that he can run the ball opens everything, opens things up for Sanders. It opens things up in the passing game. It gives them dimensions that they do not have with Gardner Minshew. I think if this season taught us anything, it's that the way that we looked at Hurts and Minshew heading into the year, the idea that the Eagles had a number 1 quarterback and a number 1A quarterback, and if Hurts didn't perform, Minshew could step in and run the show, that's been put to bed because Hurts just improved so much that, as well as Minshew played against Dallas, it wasn't the same with him out there. And it certainly wasn't the same with him out there against the Saints. So they need Jalen Hurts. Again, if winning football games is your number 1 priority now in the wake of what happened in Cincinnati Monday night, you got to put Jalen Hurts out there and you got to hope he's ready to go.
Let me follow up, and Derek Barrett, feel free to jump in. But the coordinators are speaking today. So Shane Steichen a little bit earlier said, quote, I didn't do a good enough job with my calls. I didn't do a good enough job putting our guys in a good position. I've got to do a better job. Now, you could read into that and be cynical and say he's doing an Andy Reid. I don't know. Maybe it's some kind of acknowledgement. I hope it's a wake-up call. I'm going to try to give them the benefit of the doubt and say that that's the case. Go ahead, Derek or Barrett.
Mike, going back to what you were saying about Hurts, and I agree with you, my biggest concern is calling too many design run plays for him. See, I've said this throughout the season, I don't want to see my quarterback running the ball 17 times. Now, granted, a lot of times when he's running out of necessity to avoid being sacked. I get that. and to extend the play. But for me, they call too many running plays for him. And when you are a guy who has missed 2 weeks because of this shoulder injury, especially when you consider the magnitude of the 2 games that you just lost, knowing that you only had to win one to wrap up the #1 seed. And if you put him back out there with the Giants, my concern is they're going to do this again, call too many running plays for him.
Yeah, I think that's something to consider and wonder and worry about, Gunnar. I agree with you. And I wonder, too, if Sirianni and Steichen kind of fall into the same trap, so to speak, as you kind of mentioned, Rob, that we saw with Andy Reid and that we would sometimes see with Doug Peterson, where they either overthink things or they default to the pass, right? Like the Saints were 23rd against the run.
Yeah.
You didn't have Jalen Hurts. You did have Miles Sanders and Boston Scott and Kenny Gainwell. Don't overthink, and you didn't have Lane Johnson.
Right.
Don't overthink this. Just come out there and do what you can do. You know, I go back, and I know it's a different coaching staff and situation, but I still remember the first game of the 2020 season when the Eagles played in Landover against Washington. If you guys remember that game, that was the first game of the last season of Carson Wentz.
Right.
And the Eagles got out to a 17-0 lead. And all of a sudden, Wentz started spraying the ball all over the stadium. And he threw 2 interceptions that led to Washington touchdowns. And before you knew it, the Eagles had lost the game after having a 17-point lead.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of those situations where you just said to yourself, you know what, Doug? Just run the ball. Washington stinks. They're not going to score 17 points unless you allow them to get in a position to score touchdowns, which is exactly what Doug did by calling those plays and having Wentz throw the ball. And I think Sirianni falls into that sometimes too. Again, it's an organizational philosophy. Jeffrey Lurie, Howie Roseman, they don't want the ball run all that much. For all the adjustments that Sirianni and Steichen made last season to the reality of Hurts not being ready to be the centerpiece of the offense, that's not what the Eagles want to do. They want to have their quarterback be the be-all and end-all of the offense, and I think Sirianni and Steichen do too. So, look, will they take the easy way out, so to speak, and run the ball more? I think they should, given the health of their quarterback. But as you said, Gunnar, I think it's an open question at this point. They have to show us that they're willing to be to take these measures to protect him and try to win the game.
They have to protect also that offensive line, man. They can't put that line in a position where they throw the ball that much when the right tackle is just not good enough to play at that type of level. The way the offense is called, they leave their tackles out on the island. And you can do that when you got Mailata and Lane there. But you got Jack Driscoll there. And you did not help that young man until the 3rd quarter. If they do that, we'll lose another game because Thibodeau will have about 12 snow angels out there on the ground. They leave him one-on-one. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so
look,
just be realistic. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think you're right, Barrett. I think they're going to have to adjust somehow. And it struck me how unwilling they were to do that against the Saints. Yep. You know, I mean, they called plays against the Saints as if Jalen Hurts were still their quarterback, right down to the 4th and 1 where they run a quarterback sneak. Now, the reason they're so effective on that quarterback sneak in large part is because Jalen Hurts is so freaking strong.
Yes.
Yeah.
Gardner Minshew isn't that strong compared to Jalen Hurts.
Right.
And it just isn't. You know, I wish he were.
A ragdoll in there.
He's strong compared to me. You know, all the things that Sirianni said about Jalen Hurts with respect to me, he could out-hoop you, outrun you, all that stuff. Yeah, Gardner Minshew could do that too, but not compared to Jalen Hurts.
Yeah. And it felt like, Mike, it was just like, hey, this is the offense we run. Let's keep doing it. Like, no, you adjust. You adjust. Like Doug Peterson did in 17, you adjust.
Yeah, and even, you know, going back to Andy Reid and things like that, you know, when A.J. Feely was filling in for Donovan McNabb, they adjusted. They didn't throw the ball as much because A.J. Feely wasn't Donovan McNabb. It's just what you have to do. When Jeff Garcia filled in, for all the laurels and heroism we heaped on Jeff Garcia, the Eagles didn't throw the ball as much with Garcia at quarterback. They ran Brian Westbrook more often. And I think Sirianni and Steichen have to do something similar.
How about Nick Foles going back to the read option, RPOs, the way he did it when
they redesigned the entire offense.
Right.
He went back and watched Chip Kelly film and said, this works for this guy.
Right.
And that surprises me because I don't find this coaching staff to be one that's, you know, just kind of mailing it in and plug and play. Like, I feel like they're very proactive. That's why I don't understand why we saw what we saw on Sunday. I really don't.
You know, here's the thing, Rob. And again, I don't know how Gunnar and Barrett might feel about this. I like Nick a lot as a person. I think he's a regular dude. He's about as regular a guy as you get as an NFL head coach. But after that game against New Orleans, he said something that just rang false to me, which is the idea that he said, this is why you don't get too high when things are going good, and this is why you don't get too low when things are going bad. Nick Sirianni doesn't do that. Nick Sirianni is really freaking high when things are going good. So high that he stands on a bench in Indianapolis and yells at fans because the Eagles beat his old team, the Colts, who fired his mentor Frank Reich. And he's the guy who runs up and down the sideline screaming when Devontae Smith catches a 41-yard touchdown pass against the Giants on 4th down. Okay? Nick, in that situation, Nick does not practice what he preaches. And I wonder behind closed doors, I always say, don't listen to what coaches say, watch what they do. And we're seeing what he and Steichen have done the last couple of weeks, and it's on them to show us that they're actually learning from what's gone wrong these last 2 weeks and are going to put that into practice.
Yeah. Hey, Mike, 2 questions in one real quick. Number 1, will you be at the game Sunday? Number 2, as we sit here today, what are some of the storylines that you're already developing and hope they pan out to help you formulate your story after the game?
Number 1, Gunner, I will be there. Never miss a home game if I can help it. And number 2, look, there's one story, 1.5 stories. It's Hurts and the outcome of the game. That's it. Does he play? How does he play? Does he help them win? If they lose, what is the condition of the team and, more broadly, this region's psyche if they lose that game?
And that's the truth.
Yeah, because holy cow, if they lose, the whole idea of the sky falling is going to be, so true come Monday morning.
Well, the whole season
might get burnt down.
Yeah, well, the whole season flew in counter to our Negadelphia waiting for a safe to fall. It was like not only were they playing brilliantly, nobody was getting hurt. It was like this is too good to be true, and maybe it was.
It's funny, Rob. You say that, and I believe that too. Like I thought that. We thought they'd be good. We didn't think they'd be this good. So even if they lost in, let's say, the NFC Championship game to the 49ers or something like that, it would hurt Eagles fans, but it wouldn't hurt them as much as Tampa Bay in 2003 or Carolina in 2004. Well, it might now if they lose to the Giants and they lose their first playoff game. It's just funny how things have shaken out the last couple of weeks.
Because of what's at stake. I mean, the 1 seed in a bye compared to the 5 seed in every game's on the road starting in Tampa. Like it's unbelievable. Like the difference this game could make.
Could you imagine if they end up playing in Tampa in the first round again, like they did last year?
Oh my goodness!
And
the way Brady's slinging that ball. My goodness!
Love it. And they got the start center back now too.
Yes.
Yep. Oh boy! All right. Well, Mike, it's made for a fascinating game. It's come down to the wire here. Whether it would have been better for everybody's agita, and for sure if it didn't. But now there's a lot of interest in this game, man, and it's and everything's lined up at 4:25. The Eagles, the Cowboys, and the 49ers. So there's a lot riding in that time slot.
Hey, Rob. Whether they win or they lose, I sleep the sleep of the innocent, man. Doesn't make a difference to me.
Unless you're Ricky Gunner.
I love it.
Yeah.
I'll get Mike, you. It ain't over yet. It ain't over.
We'll keep up the good work, Mike.
Bro. And thanks, guys.
We'll check you out on Twitter at Mike Sielski and, of course, WIP on the weekends with Glenn Macnow. Thank you, Mike.
You guys are the best. Thanks.
Be good, bro.
Mike Sielski, excellent, man. Does a great job on putting things in perspective. That's for sure. All right, when we come back, I do want to get into some Sixers, but first, we didn't really get into the defense, guys. We talked about the offense, what's going on with them, with their struggles. Let's talk a little bit about the defense and what we need to see here, and what guys are maybe being exposed a little bit. Go ahead, Gunner.
Sorry, Rob. Go because I forgot to bring this up earlier.
Yeah,
and it's something that nobody's talked about. Go back to Sunday's game. Do you guys remember seeing this at the end of the game? I know we all had to jump on and do our post-game show, but I saw this real quick, and I'm like, wait a minute. So who was the last Eagles player to walk off the field Sunday?
Devontae.
Did he walk off or did he limp off?
No, he limped off.
And he had help limping off the field, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So he didn't show up on the injury report yesterday.
No.
I asked about it, and I was told, this kid weighs 72 pounds, but he is one of the toughest kids I've ever seen. He'll be okay. I'm like, okay. I said, but how is he right now? Still to this moment, no response. So I'm wondering, and let's face it, we've all said We've seen this skinny dude take some incredible shots, get up off the carpet, go back and continue playing. But now, that was a definitive limp we saw, and he needed assistance walking off that field Sunday. So watch the injury reports closely this week to see, and I hope it's nothing. I hope he did bounce back, because this dude, after some of the hits he's taken this year, and I didn't see him take a bad hit Sunday against the Saints. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I didn't see him take a bad hit to the upper body or the lower body, but he had a definite limp when he walked off that field, and he had to be assisted off the field, which makes you wonder, what's his status for this week?
Something for sure to keep your eye on, right?
Yeah.
Let me give you one more thing on Steichen. This is from Josh Tolentino, who is an Eagles beat reporter for the Inquirer, for the Philadelphia Inquirer. Steichen, this is his tweet, and you can follow him at JCT Sports. Steichen labeled the Eagles' loss to the Saints as worst game as an offensive play caller, meaning his worst game as an offensive play caller. It's clear Steichen is upset at himself for not putting the offense in a better position. Repeats, he needs to put the L behind him and concentrate and focus on the Giants. Anyway, it sounds like, and I haven't heard it, obviously we're on the air while this is happening. It doesn't seem like Steichen's doing the, I got to do a better job phoniness.
Right,
it sounds like he's like, I get it. Like I didn't do a good enough job. We didn't, blah, blah, blah. So, I don't know how that affects things going forward.
Just to put it out there. Come out and bury the Giants early and get your starters off the field.
We shall see. We shall see. And we'll get, if we get any word on, what practice is going to look like, for Jalen, et cetera, we'll let people know. All right, let's get a timeout. We'll come back. We'll talk about the defense. We'll also talk a little Sixers, who won again last night and, are legitimately rolling right now. And, maybe not getting the attention. Maybe it's Eagles related. Maybe it's Sixers fatigue, like we talked about earlier in the week. So we'll dive into that when we come back. Don't go anywhere. Derek Gunn, Barrett Brooks, Rob Ellis, we're Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. I want to tell you about Flynn Tree Services. Yes, Flynn Tree Services is an experienced, licensed, and insured Pennsylvania tree services company that will trim or remove any unwanted trees off of your property. They offer cost-effective solutions to any tree problem that you may face. So if you have any type of tree issues in your yard or on your property, if you do, they're just a quick phone call away, and they are experts at trimming all types of trees. And they serve southeastern Pennsylvania, South Jersey, and northern Delaware. They specialize in tree removal, stump grinding, as well as tree pruning. Keep in mind, we're in that time of year where the weather can get a little bit nasty. It's a good time to get ahead of this thing and get your trees evaluated. You can reach out to them at 610-850-2848, 610-850-2848, or online at flynntreeservices.com. That's flynntreeservices.com.